Heroes for a New Hope is a hardcover anthology of some of the earlier comics released in the new canon, which had previously only been available as individual trades, and it features the collected editions of the Princess Leia comic, the Lando comic, and the Chewbacca comic, each of which are 5 issues long, so in total it's 15 issues collected in one volume. The first story is Princess Leia, and I thought the story was quite good, which surprised me because some of the earlier stuff after the Expanded Universe reboot just wasn't very good. I was expecting it to have a very thin plot, but actually there's enough there to keep it going for all 5 issues, keeping it interesting without losing its pace. I find quite often that short 5 or 6 issue stories just don't have the time to create good stories, but because Mark Waid chose not to try an all-important story and just wrote a story that fits, it's actually the right amount of plot for the right amount of issues. The story focuses on Princess Leia immediately after the ceremony at the end of A New Hope, and sees her trying to unite the surviving Alderaanians in an effort to preserve the destroyed planet's culture. Quite early on we meet Yvonne, another Alderaanian who challenges Leia's philosophy, questioning how they can preserve the Alderaanian culture if Leia won't act like she's a princess. She was a good character and I hope to see more of her in the future because she's a good mix of smart and action. We also see Leia dealing with sabotage, spies and underlings who undermine her, and it's this stuff that gives the story enough depth to carry on for 5 issues without feeling thin, boring or stretched out. Princess Leia isn't the deepest comic in the world, and there are no giant revelations here. In fact, if you wanted to skip it entirely you could and it wouldn't affect the rest of what you read, but I think that would be a shame because it's one of the few limited runs that I actually think felt warranted and wasn't spread out with filler or completely irrelevant. It's just a good story showing how Leia can deal with things diplomatically and how she deals with certain choices. It was a good insight into her character and I think it stayed true to the Leia we get in the movies. It was also nice to see Nien Nunb in one of the giant underground cave areas of Sullust because that's exactly where we see him in Twilight Company, so it matches up nicely. Sullust also looked exactly like how I imagined it in that book as well, so that's an added bonus. The art was nice and cartoony and did a good job of expressing emotion and action. I love when art is cartoony but not childish, but still manages to look like the people and places it's based on, and that's exactly what Terry Dodson has done. Every now and then there's a panel with Princess Leia where he's done really well, and I think it's because of her eyes in particular, but it really looks like Carrie Fisher. I was actually quite surprised when I realised Terry Dodson did the pencils, because he also did the art for Dark Force Rising, and his work here shows that when mixed with his other Star Wars work, he actually has quite a wide range of styles. Jordie Bellaire did the colouring, and it's quite a basic colour scheme with characters often being coloured in simple two-tone rather than having more complex shading, but this works and it matches the art style and tempo of the story. Probe Droid Problem was the short story in the back of the Darth Maul trade, and I believe Jordie Bellaire did the art for that too, or at the very least the colouring, and she used a very basic two-tone colouring there as well. It does make me question how talented she actually is, but her work on Princess Leia was fine. Lando's story was actually pretty good. It sees Lando and Lobot attempt a heist on a ship filled with untold riches, but unbeknownst to them it's one of the private ships of the Emperor. Not only is it one of the Emperor's ships, but it's also the Sith infiltrator that Maul had in The Phantom Menace, and I thought that was a pretty cool touch. It gets a name now, but I can't remember what it's called, because when episode 1 came out it was simply known as the Sith Infiltrator, and the new name just didn't stick with me since Sith Infiltrator has been its name for 20 years. The interaction between Lando and Lobot was also quite cool, and seeing how Lobot's cyborg implants work and how they can affect him was a great addition. It's something Sol referenced in the story he wrote for From a Certain Point of View, and Daniel Jose Older referenced in Last Shot, and that's what I like. When things are remembered by authors and referenced like that, it really does make each story, even one as small as a short story from a Certain Point of View, feel like part of one big universe rather than just lots of individual disconnected stories. I probably say it far too often, but it's worth saying because it's true. I know I'm late to the party reading Heroes for a New Hope, but I'm kind of pleased that I am, because with Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith well into its run, I instantly noticed the Sith mask hidden on the Emperor's ship. As soon as I saw it, I wondered who was writing the current Darth Vader comic, and sure enough, it's Charles Soule. Lando came out well before Dark Lord of the Sith, so he's made excellent use of something that's clearly a very powerful dark side object. There's more detail in the art in Lando than there was in Princess Leia, but it's a lot darker overall. Paul Mounts did the colours, and I found it to be very reminiscent of Sarah Pichelli's run on Ultimate Comics' Ultimate Spider-Man. There are lots of images where entire faces are coloured and then the tip of the nose is left white to show a highlight, which happened a lot in Ultimate Comics' Ultimate Spider-Man, and there's a much smoother transition between shades than there was in Princess Leia. I'm not sure whether it's due to the inker or mounts, but when the shadows appear most black, they appear really harshly rather than being faded into, and it made the comic seem a lot darker. It's mostly set on a ship in space, and most of the time it's in low power mode, but I still would have liked a bit more of an easier shift into the shadows, considering there's a smooth shift in colours. There was actually so much black and harsh changes to black that it reminded me of C-3PO the Phantom Limb. Alex Maleev did a good job with the pencils, and everyone is instantly recognisable, although I'm not really sure why the cat creatures from Avatar are in it. Although, I was talking to someone on Twitter called Jedi Geek Girl, and she pointed out that they look like the creatures on the cover of the Paradise Snare, which is the first book in the Han Solo trilogy in Legends. So who knows, maybe Charles Soule has brought them over from Legends into the new canon. The Chewbacca comic is quite good. It's light-hearted and goes by very quickly, and ultimately feels like the entire story could easily fit into an episode of a show like Rebels or The Clone Wars. While I liked it overall, I didn't appreciate the attempted retcon of A New Hope. I've lost track of how many times I've said it, but authors shouldn't fuck with the original trilogy. They are the movies that formed the foundation of literally everything. If you change the original trilogy, then you can change the books and comics too. If the movies, books and comics can all be changed, then technically nothing is canon, since you're already resigned to the fact that it can be retconned. For some reason, in Chewie's comic, it's shown that he got a medal at the end of A New Hope. Anyone who's seen that film knows Chewie didn't, so I can't understand why people try to shoehorn this shit in. In my opinion, it's pretty clear Chewie didn't get a medal, neither did R2 or 3PO. Don't fuck with that. Just accept it and leave it alone. You see, what pisses me off about Chewie getting a medal is that in the comic it's established that the reason he doesn't wear it is because it messes with his warrior image, which is total fucking bullshit. If that's the case, he still would have been presented with the medal at the end of A New Hope. Whether he received it around his neck, loose in his hands, or in a nice little case, he still would have been given the medal. But he wasn't. You know it, I know it, every fucker knows it, but they still try to directly contradict stuff. I hate when they do this shit. It's not necessary and shows that at least two people aren't paying attention to the source material. One of those people was writer Jerry Dugan. The other is Pablo Hidalgo. One is responsible for writing this shit, and the other is responsible for allowing it to go to print. Hidalgo's job is to make sure all the lore adds up. He's the supreme lawkeeper of the Star Wars universe, but constantly allows stuff to make it to print in spite of the fact that it contradicts previously established canon, and it's not on. The Chewie comic is about 3 years old now, and Hidalgo is still no better at his job. But why would he be? It's not a kids' TV show, so why should he care? There's also a scene where Chewie and Zaro escape a Star Destroyer by hijacking a TIE bomber. They didn't bother with oxygen masks, they just flew off into space. It's shit like this that pisses me off because it doesn't fit within the canon, and it really makes me question sometimes whether the writers have ever seen the movies they're basing their stories on. I wish instead of trying to overwrite the original trilogy, these authors would work around it, bolstering what's already there, much like From a Certain Point of View did. Look, it's not enough to ruin the comic, and I still think overall the comic was good, but things like that really get my fucking goat, man. It's like they just don't care. Compare this to the way Soule has tied the Lando comic into both From a Certain Point of View and the Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith comic, all while completely staying within the confines of canon and not contradicting anything from the movies or books, and the difference in terms of how everything fits together is night and day. I say it so often, but I'm saying it again. Hidalgo needs to do his fucking job properly. I liked the way the comic ended with Chewie going back to Kashyyyk to finish his mission. I had been wondering what it was, and to be honest I was expecting it to be a life day but without them actually naming it. But it wasn't. It was to give his son a bandolier as a sign of him becoming an adult Wookiee, and I thought that was a nice little touch and a good ending. From what I can tell, Phil Noto did both the pencils and the colouring, and he's done a good job. Like Princess Leia, Chewbacca has a lighter tone to it than Lando, and the art reflects that with somewhat simpler pencils and a brighter colour scheme. Noto's also added depth of field to his art, blurring the background and foreground, giving focus to the main bit of action going on in any one panel, and that one little effect really does help make the comic just look a little bit better. Something I noticed about Noto's art was that he's not afraid to use big panels. Sometimes he'll only have 3 panels on a page, but with that bright colour scheme and the depth of field, it really works and makes you look at the page more, while still managing to keep a fast pace, even in the slower moments. According to Wikipedia, one of the first things that the creative team talked about for the series was how to handle Chewbacca's dialogue since he doesn't speak Galactic Basic. Dugan told MTV, of all people, I don't know why MTV, but there you go. He told MTV that Noto has the right talent to be able to tell the story with or without dialogue from the main character. I completely agree with that. Noto does a great job of getting across the gist of what Chewie's saying through 2 things. The first is a colour-coded roar. When it's a peaceful roar, it's a light yellow colour. Irritated and mildly angry is orange, and furious and blind rage is red. I have no idea if Noto is the first to use this system for Chewie, but it definitely works. The other thing that he's done brilliantly is drawn Chewie right. Far too often when Chewie is drawn, his stance and roar don't really connect with the context of the situation, but Noto has nailed that with some mild roars in yellow coming out when Chewie has his head tilted, orange ones coming out with his head back, and really angry ones coming out in red with lots of movement, hand shaking and head shaking. As far as translating Chewie's mannerisms from the movies to the comics goes, I do think Noto absolutely nailed it. There's also one scene where you can just see the shadow of Chewie ripping the limbs off people, and it's a nice little nod to A New Hope. Heroes for A New Hope is another one where there aren't a lot of extras, and it only has a few alternate sketches and about a dozen pages of variant covers in the back. Fair play to Marvel, it comes with a dust jacket, which seemingly only half of their hardcovers come with these days. The dust jacket matches all the other proper hardcovers, so it looks great next to the other ones on my shelf, and when the jacket is removed, there's a big wraparound picture which matches their trend for the good hardcovers. This time it's a piece of art from the Chewie comic, and it looks great. Overall, Heroes for A New Hope is a good little collection of comics from the early days of the reboot. I have to admit, it baffles me that we had to wait about 2 years after this release for a Han Solo comic. Don't get me wrong, I love Lando and I think he deserves a lot more love than he's been getting under the Disney regime, but he wasn't in A New Hope, whereas Han was, so a Han story would have been more fitting in my opinion. Or they could have done both. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have a comic based on characters from the first movie, then leave one of them out and bring another one in. The stories were all good, and I think Charles Soule deserves an extra well done for taking what he created in the Lando comic and running with it even years later and making it feel like it's part of a bigger story that Lando and Lobot just happened to be a part of for a little bit. All the stories are good though, and they're all worth reading, and I liked the art in all of them. Heroes for A New Hope is not essential reading, but if you want a set of light-hearted comics, then it's definitely worth picking up. I certainly enjoyed it.